resources, and whatever I do from a global Zurich role, I need to make sure that our projects are large enough and relevant enough to where they can create a strategic impact for the group, to where I can scale them up from one country to the other. So if you're a small startup, it might still be very relevant to have a conversation, and we can talk about a lot of ideas that you may have. But in this case, I would probably pass you on to one of our local business units, where a smaller project would be more interesting than from a global perspective. And that's why, as a global unit, we're working a bit less with accelerators now than we did in the past.
My experience being that intermediaries are critical, not for signing a deal at the event, right, meeting the right person at the event, but getting out of your positive reinforcement cycle. If I look where we were as a concept 6 months ago to where we are now, and the messages I deliver in my pitches and how that has evolved, only comes from exposing myself to people in events like this who come to me and say, yes, I am from Zurich. That's not the Zurich person I'm going to do a deal with. But he says, I think you misunderstand what the problem here is, or have you ever thought about X, Y, and Z? And that cross-pollination goes both ways. That person takes something back into the organization, says, well, I know some people who do that quite differently to what you think you're doing in the company here. Let me go figure out who that was and introduce you to that person. I mean, that's how we got introduced to somebody at Zurich. I got met for something completely different. And I think that's why it's sort of the investment now for the benefit later on. Without that, I would have still been pitching the message from 6 months ago, which is maybe not as bespoke as it's now. So see the value in that.
I'll pause maybe. Are there any questions from the audience at this stage that we haven't been covering so far? Yes.
I have one question for Barbara. In your role, have you seen an uptake of implementing innovation, fintech into Zurich insurance? Sort of, do you see more traction?
Yes. So this is the big shift between when we started off with this 3 years ago. It was mostly about it was a huge change management effort, right? It was about getting everybody from the top executive committee to our people engaged in this, and it was a lot about attending conferences, showing proof of concepts, creating a culture shift, and now the focus is all about implementation. And we only do projects if we know that they can have a real business impact within 12 months, i.e. where I can really see bottom line results in the business, and where I know they can be scaled from one country to another, and where they're very closely tied with our strategic priorities. That's also why we've always kept the innovation unit very close to our strategy unit. But we're working more and more, and on a daily basis I'm working with our countries, because that's how you get the implementation going. And I'm even to the point where I'm actually almost doing project management on certain country projects, just to make sure that things that we're doing really get implemented into the business. And that's also why I said initially, I just, for me the one big learning is, whatever you do, you always need to have your local business sponsors highly engaged and in the lead, because the only people who can really make it happen are the people in the business.
I think I've heard similar coming from Swiss Re as well, in terms of how they've tried to shift their focus as well, right? Very much aligned with...
Yeah, it's obviously quite a bit of a different model in that it's very internally focused.
Okay.
So Swiss Re doesn't really have direct custom stuff.
Right.
So it's more internal efficiency focused, and so they're more inclined to go out to VCs and accelerators, where they try to drop in really complex products and then sort of become part of the development themselves. But that's normally very bespoke, and something very bespoke to Swiss Re. It's global in the nature, and I think it's a bit different to what you would see with normal customer-facing brands.
Hans.
Question for Barbara, probably about can you differentiate between MVP and proof of concept? Or explain the two?
So MVP is a minimum viable product, so that's usually saying what is at a minimum, what do we need? Let me take a step back. Usually when we get into brainstorming discussions, right, and you have a business problem, and then you start defining what you would ultimately love to achieve, right, and usually it's very aspirational, and it might take a long time to really put it into practice. Now, a very useful concept is the concept of the minimum viable product, where you say, what is like really the core minimum that we need to have achieved in order to show that this can really work. So that's how I would define a minimum viable product. Proof of concept for me, but I personally think there are no hardcore definitions, but for me, or the way we have implemented it in the past, is a minimal viable product is almost like showing how it, the bare basics of how it could work. In a proof of concept, I do want to see a bit more in terms of how would this tie with our, I don't know, with our IT systems. How is this really, you know, knowing that the technology works, how can I really get it into our business?
So
but I don't know how you see the
proof of concept isn't necessarily a product that functions. It's more an explanation of how it's going to work, whereas an MVP can actually be used.
Could I?
How would
So
you,
the proof of concept is a sequence of things that needs to happen to deploy full commercially. That means that's why we're saying, here's something we want to do, and this is our first gate that we check. So the proof of concept is, over this period, we're going to build this, this, and this, and these are the success criteria, so we will consider this POC a success if this, this, and this happens. If we've achieved that, we will start building to first full commercial implementation. And to prove that, you want to do it in an MVP format, so the POC should be the minimum amount of work you do to prove that buy-in to then go forward. So some people go much more broad, but ideally the POC element, the first bit, should be based on an MVP, both from a product side as well as a technology side.
Thanks.
Minimum resource implementation.
Yeah.
I mean, my simple definition between the two is that proof of concept is more like a solution. A product is a product, and it could be used in a variety of ways, but a solution is saying, I've heard your particular problem, and here's a solution to that particular problem. So it's more customized, which takes a bit of work on the side of the vendor.
It's almost a bit like a non-functional and a working prototype, right? One of them is the bare minimum that says, hey, this is what it would look like, and the next version is showing you that it actually can do what it's supposed to, I guess.
No, but MVP, again, MVP is, I think we must avoid looking at things at a moment in time, right? So people like to say we want to get an MVP and think that on Wednesday we will look at something that is an MVP. An MVP is also a time series thing, is that part of it will be functional, non-functional. As you build towards the MVP, you put your screens in, you test it with people, and then you realize, oh, my thumb doesn't actually go up there, so it's actually a bit stupid. And then by Wednesday you have an MVP. But all of those form parts of the journey towards an MVP.
Proof of concept, it's something that a lot of us have been hearing for the first time in recent years. Is it the new norm? Is there a better alternative? Is this something we're going to be talking more and more about in the future? How do you see that?
I think it's a communication thing. I think corporates know what POCs are. It's this new, how do you say, overlap that's happening with startups and corporates, is that they have to find a common language to understand what it is that both sides expect. And POC is just, I feel, the corporate's way of explaining to the startups exactly what they need to at least be able to do before we do anything. Because it's just, if Salesforce shows up, they don't need to do a POC. They can just say, look at this, here's examples, either you want to be the same as your competitors or not, or better. And whereas a startup has to still prove themselves.
Right.
My experience has been, and this is also like why I was hesitating, or I couldn't really answer your question, because we've used these concepts in a very fluid way, and we've been a bit flexible about them. But my experience has been that you need to, it's a fine line or fine balance between how much you how much you need to show to make something, or how much you need to prove to make something useful. And what I mean by that is, I think initially we were coming from a world where everybody was so afraid of all these IT projects, and afraid it would take 5 years and cost hundreds of millions, that we did like very, very short basic proof of concepts, which